God! What in the hell was that?
Deep inside the silent wilderness of the Pine Barrens lived a woman known as Mother Leeds. Her real name had long been forgotten. People in the nearby villages spoke of her only by that title, as if motherhood was the only identity she ever had, and the burden of raising 12 hungry mouths had erased the woman she once was. Her cabin stood alone among twisted pine trees, half buried in shadows even during daylight. Wind always seemed to move differently around her home, as if the forest itself knew her sorrow. Mother Leeds was not evil by nature. She had once been gentle, full of warm laughter. But life in the wilderness was harsh, and every child she gave birth to slowly drained the light from her eyes. Her husband, a man who loved whiskey more than work, often disappeared for days into the forest. People whispered that he gambled, stole, and lied his way through life, and that Mother Leeds carried shame heavier than hunger. Each year brought another child, another winter of cold nights. Another season of hands reaching out for food she could not provide. When she discovered she was pregnant with her 13th child, something inside her finally broke. It was not a dramatic moment. It was quiet, like the soft sound of wood cracking under years of pressure. She sat on the edge of her straw mattress, her hands trembling against her stomach, and tears fell without expression. She did not scream. She did not wail. The grief was too deep for loudness. She simply stared at the wall with hollow eyes, as if she could already see the future one filled with hunger, sickness, and misery. In those days, people believed that despair was a doorway, that words spoken in suffering could become a prayer for spirits lurking in the unseen corners of the world. And on a night when the wind howled like wolves at her windows, Mother Leeds collapsed into anger and hopelessness. Surrounded by her sleeping children, she screamed into the darkness, her voice sharp enough to pierce through branches and storm clouds. "Let this child be a devil." The words tore from her throat like a curse she didn't fully control. It was a sentence born from exhaustion, not hatred, but the world outside did not care about her intentions. The Pine Barrens were a strange place, even during calm weather, but that night a storm rose with unnatural rage. Lightning stabbed the sky again and again, illuminating twisted trees like giant claws. Rain hammered the roof, shaking dust from the ceiling. And as thunder echoed through the cabin, it sounded frighteningly like laughter, deep, rolling, ancient laughter. The villagers said the storm did not come from the heavens, but crawled out from under the earth summoned by the curse of a broken woman. Some claimed they saw shadows moving between flashes of lightning, shapes that did not belong to any animal known in New Jersey. Others swore they heard a baby crying in the wind, though the child had not yet been born. The storm felt alive, like a response. The forest itself seemed to listen, as if the trees leaned closer to hear her furious plea. Days turned into weeks, and rumors spread. Women passing by the Leeds cabin crossed themselves and hurried their steps. Children dared each other to peek through the trees, whispering stories of witches and demons. Even the bravest hunters avoided the area, saying the pine needles on the ground formed patterns like twisted symbols. Mother Leeds rarely left her home. Her face became pale, her eyes sunken, and villagers who glimpsed her from afar said she looked haunted, like someone who had seen death waiting at her doorstep. In her dreams, she saw strange visions. In one, she held a child wrapped in a blanket, but its crying turned into a shriek that shook her bones. In another, she saw hoof-like footprints burned into the dirt, leading into the dark woods. Sometimes she awoke in the middle of the night with the feeling that something heavy was sitting at the foot of her bed, watching her with glowing eyes. On the final night of her pregnancy, the storm returned, just as violent as before, as if it had been waiting all these months. Neighbors heard the wind scream like tortured souls. Thunder roared above the cabin, shaking its wooden frame. Mother Leeds went into labor alone, her children huddled together in fear. The air inside felt thick, suffocating, filled with a pressure that made every breath painful. The moment the child came into the world, the storm outside reached its peak. Lightning exploded across the sky, turning night into a blinding white. And for a moment, just a moment, everyone in the forest felt something shift, as if reality itself bent around the newborn child. At first, everything was silent. The baby looked ordinary, small and fragile, like any other newborn. Mother Leeds cried tears of relief, believing that perhaps her curse had been swallowed by the storm and forgotten. She held the child close, whispering apologies into its soft hair. But the storm did not fade. The wind outside twisted into a howl that sounded almost like a voice. The flames of the candles flickered wildly, spilling shadows across the walls. And deep within the baby's dark eyes, something ancient stirred, something that did not belong in the world of men. In that instant, Mother Leeds realized her words had not disappeared into the night. They had taken root, and whatever answer had come was now lying in her arms. The curse had become real. The storm outside raged with unnatural fury on the night the child was born. Rain crashed against the cabin like fists pounding on the walls, turning every drop into a scream that joined the chorus of thunder. The Pine Barrens were usually quiet, but that night the earth itself seemed to tremble. It was as if something ancient was awakening, drawn by the curse spoken months earlier by a mother too broken to understand the power of her own despair. Inside the narrow cabin, lit only by flickering candles, Mother Leeds gripped the edge of her bed. Sweat rolled down her forehead, mixing with tears as she struggled through labor. The children huddled together in the corner, trembling every time the thunder cracked overhead. The room smelled of damp wood, blood, and candle smoke. Shadows twisted across the walls, growing long, almost claw-like whenever lightning flashed. After hours of agony, the child finally entered the world. For a long moment, everything stood still. The wind outside hesitated, the rain softened to a whisper, and even the trees seemed to hold their breath. The baby lay in her arms, tiny, warm, almost peaceful. Its skin was soft, its eyes closed. It breathed with a gentle rhythm, as any newborn would. A heavy silence filled the room. A silence so deep that Mother Leeds hoped her curse had been nothing more than a cry of frustration that vanished into the storm. Her heart softened for the first time in months. She held the baby close to her chest, whispering a prayer for forgiveness. She had expected a demon, a monster born of anger. But here was a normal child, a child who might never know the pain that drove her to utter such cruel words. A wave of relief washed over her, so powerful that it nearly took her breath away. The children gathered closer, smiling timidly at their new sibling. But relief is a fragile thing. It can be shattered by the first sign of the truth. It began with a twitch barely noticeable. The baby's fingers curled in a strange way, stiff and sharp. Its skin, once soft, cracked like drying clay. A faint, dry sound echoed through the room, like branches snapping under a heavy weight. The child's breathing changed, turning shallow and raspy. Mother Leeds lifted her head, confusion tightening her face. Then the skin darkened. In seconds, the newborn's flesh hardened, taking on a leathery texture that looked almost reptilian. Its tiny arms stretched unnaturally, bones pushing outward with sickening pops. The children screamed. The eldest ran to the door, shaking the handle with panic, but the storm outside held it shut, as if the wind itself wanted them to witness what came next. The baby's back split open, not with blood, but with the tearing sound of skin stretching far beyond its limits. From the wound burst wings, membranes thin as paper, veined like leaves, but shaped like those of a bat. Black and glistening, the wings unfolded slowly, like two living scars crawling into existence. Lightning flashed through the window, revealing the creature's face twisted and grotesque. Its eyes were no longer human. They glowed with a dull red light, ancient and cold, like something buried under centuries of darkness. Tiny fingers turned into claws, curved and sharp, scratching the air. Its mouth elongated into a snout, teeth jagged like broken glass. The transformation was rapid, brutal, unstoppable. Every second brought a new horror, bones cracking, limbs twisting, wings stretching wide enough to brush the walls. The candles flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows around the creature, as if the darkness itself was celebrating its birth. Mother Leeds screamed, backing away until her spine hit the wall. The pain of childbirth was forgotten, swallowed by a terror so deep it numbed her thoughts. Her children cried and clung to each other, faces pale, eyes wide with disbelief. None of them could speak. They could only watch as the newborn, something that had been human just moments ago, became a nightmare given flesh. The creature lifted its head and released a scream. It was not the cry of a child, nor the howl of any animal known to the forest. It was a sound sharp enough to pierce bone, a scream filled with rage, confusion, and ancient hunger. The cabin windows rattled, the walls shook, and the storm outside roared back, as if answering a command. Then, with terrifying strength, the creature leaped. Its wings beat the air like thunder. It crashed through the window, shattering the glass into 1,000 shards that sparkled in the lightning. Rain burst into the room, soaking the floor, extinguishing the candles. The children ducked as pieces of wood and glass rained down. For a heartbeat, Mother Leeds saw her creature child silhouetted against the storm, before it vanished into the black sky. Silence returned, broken only by the wind pushing cold air through the shattered window. The family remained frozen in place, unable to move, think, or speak. The reality of what they had seen felt too heavy to understand. A curse whispered in anger had become flesh, wings, and fury. The storm outside continued to rage, but now it sounded like laughter mocking the mother who had called upon darkness. In the world that would never again sleep peacefully, knowing what had been born in the heart of the Pine Barrens. The Leeds family would carry that night in their memory for the rest of their lives. The night their child became the Jersey Devil, a creature not of nature, but of despair made real. From the moment it tore itself from its mother's arms and vanished into the storm, the creature disappeared into the vast, twisted maze of the Pine Barrens. The forest was deeper than any map could capture, stretching across swamps, thickets, and miles of tangled pine roots. It was a place where compasses spun uselessly, where travelers could walk in circles for days, without ever seeing the sun break through the canopy. To the creature, the Barrens were more than a hiding place. They were a womb of darkness, the only world that would accept something born with wings and a curse. For days after its birth, wind carried the sound of its cries across the woods. They were not ordinary cries, but a strange, broken imitation of an infant, weeping twisted with echoes of something older, wilder. Villagers who lived near the edge of the forest spoke of hearing a baby deep in the trees, though no one dared to follow the sound. Some believed it was a lost child. Others whispered that it was a lure, a trap for anyone foolish enough to seek it out. In the Pine Barrens, kindness could be the first step toward ruin. As the creature grew, the forest grew darker. Strange signs began to appear in the morning dew. Hunters found hoof-like tracks pressed deep into the mud, too large for any deer, too heavy for any animal that walked on two legs. The tracks came in patterns that made no sense. A long stride followed by a sudden leap that spanned impossible distances. Claw marks gouged into tree bark several feet above the ground, as though something leaped from trunk to trunk like a shadow with wings. Children dared each other to walk along the forest line, pointing to broken branches that hung unnaturally low, as if something heavy had perched there during the night. Farmers woke to find their livestock trembling, eyes wide with terror, though there were no wounds on their bodies. A quiet dread, as if the animals had been watched from the darkness for hours. At first, people tried to explain it away. They blamed wolves, storms, cruel coincidences. But the Pine Barrens were not known for wolves, and coincidences did not leave claw marks 14 feet above the ground. Soon, the whispers started quiet conversations over candlelight, exchanged with nervous glances at windows. The villagers spoke of the Leeds family, of the strange storm that followed the 13th child's birth, of the shattered window and the screams in the night. They began to call it the Jersey Devil. The name spread like a sickness across neighboring towns. To some, it was a joke, something to frighten children and add drama to fireside stories. To others, it was a curse spoken aloud, something dangerous that turned belief into invitation. Mothers scolded their children for saying the name, claiming it would draw the creature closer. But children are often the bravest, or the most foolish of all. They whispered it anyway, daring the dark to answer. Meanwhile, deeper in the forest, the creature wandered alone between crooked pine trunks. It learned to stalk without sound, to hide in the shadows cast by moonlight on the rough bark. Hunger guided its instincts. The forest was filled with things that crawled, flew, and scurried. But the creature was no animal of instinct, was something born from a human mother, and shaped by something ancient. It hunted not for survival alone, but as if driven by a hunger it did not understand. Rabbits fell silent beneath its claws. Birds vanished into its teeth. And though its body was twisted, its mind remembered a softness from somewhere far away, warmth it once knew for only a few minutes in the arms of the woman who cursed it. Sometimes, the creature returned to the edge of the woods, drawn by the faint memory of human voices. Villagers told stories of seeing a dark figure perched high in the tree's horns, silhouetted against the moon. Wings folded tightly around its body like a cloak. They described eyes glowing faintly red, watching farmhouses from a distance, as though studying the world it had been born from and abandoned to. It never attacked those who looked upon it, not then. It simply watched, listened, and vanished before dawn could reveal its shape. One hunter swore that he saw it in a clearing at midnight. It stood upright like a man, but moved with the fluidity of a beast. Its wings hung loosely behind it, brushing the ground with each step. The hunter admitted he wanted to raise his rifle, but fear held his hand frozen. The creature turned its head slowly toward him, eyes shining through the darkness like embers in a dying fire. It did not roar or scream. It simply stared, as if recognizing something familiar in the hunter: fear, perhaps, or loneliness. Then it leaped into the air, wings snapping open with a sound like rupturing fabric, and disappeared into the treetops in a single beat. Word spread faster. Rumors grew wilder. Some claimed the creature could vanish into mist, that its cry froze the blood in a man's veins. Others said it was the spirit of the forest itself, punishing those who dared to disturb its ancient peace. Old women whispered that Mother Leeds had not cursed the child, but opened a door. Whatever the truth, one thing became certain. The Jersey Devil was no longer a story. It was a presence felt in the silence between trees, in the cold wind that swept through the pines at night, in the way even the bravest men looked over their shoulders on moonless roads. It was the cursed 13th child, sent into darkness by its own mother's despair, and now claimed by the forest as its own. News of the winged creature spread quickly across New Jersey, traveling from farm to farm, tavern to tavern, whispered with fear around every wooden table. Livestock had gone missing, chickens were torn apart without leaving a trace of blood, and horses refused to leave their barns at night. Families locked their doors before sunset, and prayed that whatever lived in the Pine Barrens would not come scratching at their windows. The people had reached their breaking point. Something had to be done. The best hunters from the surrounding towns gathered in a clearing near the edge of the pinelands. They came armed with whatever weapons they trusted, most muskets, sharpened spears, iron traps, and wooden stakes dipped in holy water by a traveling missionary who claimed to know how to banish demons. Their hounds were restless, pulling at their leashes. Noses pointed toward the forest as if they sensed the unnatural presence hiding beyond the trees. The night of the hunt was cold and heavy with fog. Clouds blocked the moonlight, leaving only the flickering glow of torches to guide the men through the thick pine branches. As they advanced deeper into the forest, silence swallowed the sound of their footsteps. Even the insects had stopped singing. The entire forest seemed to be holding its breath. The lead hunterman named Collins, known for killing the largest wolves in the region, raised his fist to stop the group. He crouched low, putting his ear to the ground. The hounds whined nervously. Something moved ahead, too light for a human, too fast for a deer. Before the men could react, an ear-splitting shriek echoed through the trees, a scream full of both rage and sorrow. It sounded like a child crying, but twisted by something ancient and cruel. The hunters rushed forward, weapons ready. Torchlight illuminated a figure perched in the branches above, leathery wings folded tight, small glowing eyes staring down at them with animal intelligence. For a moment, the creature did not move. Its clawed feet dug into the bark. Steam rose from its nostrils with each breath. Collins aimed his musket and fired. The explosion shook the silence, but the shot passed through the creature as if it were made of shadow. In a blur, the Jersey Devil unfurled its wings and launched itself into the air. Wind from its wings blew out the torches, plunging the forest into darkness. Hounds barked wildly, snapping at the air, chasing the shape that was no longer there. The hunters fired blindly, missing every shot. Above them, they heard branches snapping, then a thump, something landing behind them. Panic spread. One hunter screamed as he was pulled into the fog, his cry cut short. The others spun in circles, unable to see what hunted them. Collins swung his torch, but the flame illuminated nothing but swirling mist. Another man fell, dragged into the darkness by something with great strength. The forest echoed with the sound of wings, circling them like a predator enjoying the fear of its prey. By dawn, only half the hunters returned to the clearing. Their faces were pale, their eyes vacant, as if part of their souls had been left in the forest. The hounds came back with tails tucked between their legs, refusing to step near the trees. Collins remained silent about what happened in the darkness. When questioned, he simply said, "It knows the forest better than we ever will," and walked away. Musket hanging uselessly at his side. Word of the failed hunt spread even faster than news of the creature itself. People understood the message clearly. The Jersey Devil could not be hunted, and it could not be killed by ordinary means. Some claimed the devil was protected by the cursed roots of the pine trees, able to vanish inside the fog, as if the forest itself hid it. Others believed it was not a physical creature at all, but the restless spirit of the 13th child born from a mother's curse, and never meant to walk among mortals. From that day forward, no one dared enter the Pine Barrens after sunset. Lamps were lit in every window at night, not to see, but to ward off whatever might come out of the trees. Farmers carved symbols of protection on their barn doors. Children were warned that if they wandered too close to the forest, the Jersey Devil would spot them from its treetop perch and carry them away into the endless fog. Years passed, but the fear survived like a shadow that never faded. The forest remained quiet, but the people knew the silence was only a disguise. Somewhere in the depths of the pine wilderness, the creature watched, waiting. Wings folded like a nightmare, hidden against the darkness. And every so often, on the coldest nights, the wind carried a distant echo half-cry, half-roar reminding everyone in New Jersey that the hunt had failed, and the devil still lived. The Pine Barrens may have been vast, but soon the people learned that distance meant nothing to the cursed creature. It was no longer just a whisper from the depths of the forest. It was at their fences, their barns, their windows. Fear spread like frost over every village near the pinelands. It began with livestock. Farmers woke before dawn to find their animals lying still and the stries open, bodies cold. There were no wounds, no blood, nothing but long claw marks carved into the dirt, circling the corpses like a warning, as if the killer wanted the world to know exactly who had been there. Horses refused to drink, bleeding goats pressed themselves against the walls of stables, and dogs howled through the night, as though they sensed a predator that walked the air instead of the ground. No one dared to speak loudly about what was happening, but the rumors grew anyway. Some said the devil could kill with a touch, draining the life from any living creature it chose. Others believed its voice could freeze blood, that its cry was both the wail of a newborn and the roar of something ancient, something that had listened to the curse of a desperate mother and taken form just to carry it out. Children, being too curious to hide from their fears, were the first to speak of the thing at their windows. They whispered to each other in the corners of classrooms, describing a horned silhouette beyond the glass. A face with glowing eyes like embers pressed against the darkness, watching them breathe. The older children swore they saw a long tail curling like smoke beneath the window frame. The younger ones cried at night, insisting something scratched at the wood, its claws tracing the shape of a child's hand from the other side. Parents dismissed the stories at first, thinking nightmares had been fed by the endless warnings passed around dinner tables. But then the mothers began hearing the tapping, slow, deliberate tapping, along the shutters during windless nights. Some described a sound like wings brushing against the roof tiles, followed by silence so heavy it made their hearts pound. They locked their doors, not because they believed the wood would protect them, but because doing anything felt better than waiting helplessly. Soon, a strange tradition grew from the fear. The number 13 was banned from their mouths. No mother dared to speak it while counting children, waiting for meals, or marking months on calendars. They believed the cursed child of Mother Leeds would hear the number like a calling, like a reminder of what it once was. Instead, they called it the number after 12, or the number that must not be spoken. It was a superstition born from panic. No one dared to break it. One evening, an elderly woman named Martha, known for telling stories of spirits, gathered a few villagers in her small kitchen. She spoke of the curse as if it had been woven into the land itself. "The devil is not bound by the forest," she whispered, eyes wide even in the dim candlelight. "It carries the rage of its mother. It was born from hatred, and hatred travels faster than feet or wings." Her words echoed in the minds of the villagers long after they returned home. If the creature was born of emotion rather than flesh, what could stop it? Weapons had failed. Faith had trembled. Hunters had vanished into the fog. And now, even silence had become a fragile shield they held between themselves and the night. One by one, families began placing charms above their doors, wooden crosses, iron nails, braided horsehair, blessed by traveling priests. They tied bells to window latches, hoping the sound would drive away whatever came in the dark. Some even left offerings at the edge of the woods: milk, bread, bits of cloth, anything to convince the devil to spare their homes. No one knew what it wanted: food, revenge, recognition. Or was it simply driven by a curse that it could never escape? One night, a man named Walter claimed he heard footsteps on his roof hooves, not boots. He reached for his lantern, trembling as he climbed the stairs. Just as he lifted the glass to peer out, something scraped across the shingles, followed by a low, mournful cry that made the hair on his arms stand upright. It sounded like a child sobbing against a grave. He dropped the lantern, and the flame died on the floor. In the dark, he listened, not daring to move until the sound faded into the trees. The next morning, he found claw marks on the roof, 3 deep lines, as if something heavy had dragged its talons across the wood. Walter did not speak of what he heard, but his eyes told the story. The devil was not a distant legend, which was above him, close enough to hear his breath. In time, people stopped asking whether the Jersey Devil was real. Truth had become unnecessary. Too many nights had passed with scratching sounds. Too many fields had turned silent. Too many shadows had hovered just outside the edges of torchlight. The Pine Barrens still stood quiet, but now the quiet meant danger. The villagers understood what the hunters had refused to accept. There are some curses born not to be broken, but to be lived and feared. And somewhere in the trees, in the thick fog that wrapped the ground like a shroud, the creature listened, waiting for its next breath of fear to call it closer, closer than anyone dared imagine. By the early 19th century, the legend had spread far beyond the villages scattered around the Pine Barrens. Travelers passing through New Jersey carried the story with them of a winged beast born from a curse, of failed hunts and terrified farmers, of a creature that could slip between shadows like smoke. Soon, the tale reached the ears of men who did not believe in superstition: the American military. At first, the officers laughed. Devil stories were for frightened children, not soldiers hardened by wars and wilderness. But the reports continued to come: livestock slaughtered, families vanishing in the woods, hunters disappearing without a trace. The most unsettling accounts came from scouts sent through the region. They spoke of hearing screams in the night, sounds like a child crying and a beast roaring at the same time. Some claimed they saw a shadow with wings circling above the treetops, moving faster than any bird could fly. Curiosity turned to concern. What if the creature was not a myth? What if something dangerous truly lurked among the pines? The decision was made: a hunting expedition, not of frightened farmers, but of trained soldiers equipped with rifles, cannons, and enough ammunition to bring down any beast of flesh and bone. On a cold autumn morning, a column of soldiers marched into the Pine Barrens. Their boots thudded across the earth, rifles over their shoulders, cannons dragged behind horses that snorted and pulled against their reins. The air was thick with fog, heavy with the smell of pine resin and wet soil. Locals stood at a distance, watching with wide eyes, whispering prayers, not for the soldiers, but for themselves. They knew the forest did not belong to humans after nightfall. The men set up camp in a clearing near the heart of the barrens. Tents were pitched, perimeter stakes hammered into the ground, and the cannons positioned toward the thickest part of the woods. The soldiers laughed and told stories around the fire, refusing to admit that each flickering shadow made them turn their heads. Their laughter echoed, swallowed by the trees as if the forest were listening. As darkness fell, the humming of insects faded, replaced by a deep silence. The trees stood motionless, as though frozen. A cold wind swept through the camp, extinguishing 2 of the torches. The soldiers fell quiet. In the distance, something screamed. It was a sound they had never heard before, high and sharp, like a baby's cry stretched into a shriek. Then it dropped low, rumbling like a growl from a throat that should not exist. The horses panicked, rearing against their ropes. Men scrambled to their rifles. Officers shouted orders, but their voices were thin compared to that terrible scream vibrating through the air. A musket flared. A shot fired into the darkness. Then another. The soldiers fired volley after volley into the trees, but their bullets found nothing. The only response was laughter, not human laughter, but a twisted mockery, echoing between the trunks. It sounded close, then far, then above them, as if the creature moved through the night itself. "Hold your fire," an officer roared. But before the men could regroup, the forest erupted with another scream, so loud it rattled the very stakes in the ground. The torches flickered wildly, casting monstrous shapes across the trees. One soldier swore he saw two glowing embers, staring from a branch, but when he blinked, they were gone. The cannons were loaded in desperate haste. The officers ordered the trees bombarded, hoping sheer force would kill whatever lurked in the shadows. The first cannon blast tore through the quiet, like a thunderclap. Smoke filled the air. The second blast followed, shaking the earth beneath their feet. Trees splintered. Birds exploded into flight. Echoes rolled endlessly through the forest. Then silence. For a moment, the soldiers believed they had won. Their weapons had shattered the night, torn the woods apart, and silenced the screams. Men exhaled and lowered their rifles. Horses slowly calmed. Officers walked forward, hoping to find the body of the devil among the smoking remains of broken branches. That was when the laughter returned. It drifted from the treetops, soft at first, like the breathy giggle of a child hiding behind a curtain. Then it grew louder, sharper, slicing through the cold. It circled the clearing, moving faster than any animal could run, bouncing off the trees, rising into the sky, then crashing back down like thunder. The soldiers froze. Their hands trembled. Some fell to their knees, clutching their ears, as if the sound were drilling into their skulls. No weapon could silence that laughter. It felt like the forest was mocking them, reminding every man that they had invaded a place ruled by something far older than their guns. Something born of pain rather than flesh. A few soldiers fired into the sky, but the darkness swallowed their bullets. Not a single man saw the creature clearly. They only saw shapes, shadows, wings like torn cloth fluttering above the smoke. By dawn, the camp was deserted. The soldiers packed their weapons and retreated, leaving behind broken branches, crushed earth, and the echo of screams hidden in the fog. Their reports were brief and vague, stripped of emotion, but their eyes told a different story, eyes haunted by something they could not explain. In town, rumors spread even faster than the truth. Some villagers said the soldiers angered the devil by stepping into its territory, that its laughter was the sound of victory. Others claimed the creature was not harmed because it was not of this world. Cannons could break trees, but not curses. Bullets could kill flesh, but not hatred carried into life. The military never returned to the Pine Barrens with cannons again. The official records dismissed the hunt as a failed operation, blaming fog, echoes, and unknown wildlife. But those who were there whispered a different truth. The Jersey Devil could not be hunted, because it was never just a creature. It was a scream born from a cursed prayer, still echoing through the pines whenever humans dared to challenge it. And sometimes, on cold nights, travelers swear they still hear the laughter floating between the trees, like a reminder that some nightmares do not end with dawn. They simply wait for the next foolish soul who believes guns are stronger than curses. Long after the soldiers retreated from the Pine Barrens, the legend of the Jersey Devil grew into something larger than fear alone. It became a belief, a truth whispered from generation to generation, passed down in a voice so quiet it seemed afraid to wake something sleeping in the trees. Those who lived closest to the forest spoke with certainty, not imagination. The Jersey Devil could not be killed. To the villagers, the creature was not merely an animal with wings and claws. It was a curse given flesh, born from a mother's hatred, and shaped by forces beyond understanding. They believed that as long as the pine trees whispered in the wind, as long as the marshes remained dark and deep, the devil would remain a part of the land, more spirit than body. Some swore the creature did not age like humans do. Its face, glimpsed only in nightmares and unlucky sightings, remained that of a twisted child, smooth pale, forever frozen in the moment it left its mother's arms. Yet with each passing decade, its wings seemed larger, stretching across the sky like tattered sails. Its eyes, once small and frightened, burned brighter, glowing red whenever the moon rose full and round, illuminating the forest floor like a silver pool. The elders of the villages would gather around fireplaces during winter, the flames flickering over their wrinkled faces. They told stories to the young tales of hunters who vanished, soldiers who fled, and the sound of laughter drifting between the trees. But their voices always dropped to a whisper when they spoke the old belief. As long as the Pine Barrens stand, its cry will never fade. It was said that the devil's life was tied to the land itself. the soil that fed the pines, the roots that coiled like veins beneath the earth. The thick fog that drifted between the trunks, all of it, was connected to the curse. Cutting down a tree would not weaken the devil. Burning the woods would not destroy it. Some claimed that even if the entire forest were reduced to ash, the creature would rise from the smoke, reborn with the howl of the wind. Over the years, a few outsiders dared to test the legend. Traveling hunters from distant towns came armed with strange weapons, convinced they could succeed where others had failed. They set traps, baited with blood, laid lines of salt across the forest floor, carried crosses forged from iron. But the forest remained still, hiding all signs of life. Days passed without a single sound, until the hunters began to believe the stories were lies. Then, on the fourth night, when fatigue clouded their senses, the shriek came rising from the darkness, like a nightmare breaking open. The hunters fled, abandoning their weapons on the moss-covered ground. In the morning, only hoofprints remained, pressed deep into the mud, as if the devil had landed in front of their camp and laughed at their arrogance. Over time, people stopped trying to kill the creature. Fear transformed into a kind of uneasy respect. They learned to live alongside the legend, as if sharing the land with something that could not be seen but always existed. Villagers raised their children with warnings, not rules. Never whistle after midnight. Never speak the number 13 in the woods. Never follow a crying sound deeper into the trees, because the devil-esque voice could mimic the sorrow of a lost child. Despite the warnings, stories continued to surface. A trapper claimed he saw the devil's reflection in a lake, its wings stretched like a black mirror. A young woman swore a red glow appeared outside her window on a full moon, staring at her with unblinking eyes. A preacher passing through town reported hearing laughter echoing above the rooftops, though there was no wind and no children on the streets. Yet none of these sightings led to proof. The devil remained elusive, visible only in moments of terror or silence. It was said that anyone who looked directly into its eyes would feel something ancient, something colder than fear itself rising up from their bones. Not hatred, not anger, but a sorrow so deep it felt bottomless. The sorrow of a child cursed before it could speak its first word. This belief gave birth to a darker idea. Perhaps the Jersey Devil did not hunt out of hunger or rage. Perhaps it was searching for something, an end to its endless existence, a way to break the curse without breaking itself. But curses born from pain are not easily undone. They linger, pass through time like an echo trapped between trees. Seasons turn to years. Years turn to decades. The Pine Barrens remained untouched by cities or roads. The forest endured storms, fires, winters of ice, summers of choking heat, and still the rumors continued. On some nights when the sky was clear and the moon poured silver light across the land, a scream would rise from the depths of the forest. It was the same sound heard for generations, stretching across a cry that was both newborn and ancient, both innocent and monstrous. Older villagers would shake their heads and close their shutters, whispering the words that had survived every attempt to destroy the legend. As long as the Pine Barrens stand, its cry will never fade. And in the darkness beyond the trees, where the mist swallowed all footsteps, the Jersey Devil listened, its wings curled against its back, eyes glowing red like dying embers, waiting for the next century to arrive. Because time meant nothing to a creature that could not die. The forest was its cradle, its prison, and its throne. As long as the pines stood tall, the devil remained eternal. Long before the roads were paved and the forest was carved into maps, there was a narrow trail that wound like a snake through the densest part of the Pine Barrens. It was little more than packed earth, bordered by ancient trees, whose branches intertwined overhead, forming a tunnel of shadows, even at midday. Travelers used the path out of necessity, not choice. It was the quickest way between two distant villages. Over time, many came to call it simply the Forest Road, a name spoken casually, without thought. But that changed in one terrible night. The story begins with a lone carriage driver named Elias Morton. He was known as a quiet man, one who kept his head down, spoke little, and worked hard. Elias carried goods between towns, guiding his aging horse through the forest trail under the glow of lanternlight. Though others feared the woods after sunset, Elias believed danger was made of flesh and steel, not shadows and legends. To him, the Jersey Devil was just a story used to frighten children into obedience. It was the late autumn season. when the wind cut through the trees like a knife and dead leaves covered the forest floor in a blanket of crackling gold. Elias was returning from a distant village, his carriage heavy with supplies. The moon was a thin crescent, barely slicing through the darkness. The lantern swayed beside the driver's seat, casting trembling light on the twisting path ahead. For hours, the only sound came from the rhythmic clop of hooves and the soft creak of the wagoness wheels. Then, somewhere in the distance, Elias heard a noise so strange and out of place that he pulled the reins without thinking. The horse snorted and stomped its hooves nervously. Elias listened, heart pounding unexpectedly. The sound came again, a sharp cry, almost like a child calling for help, but drawn out into something long and terrible. The wind stilled. The forest fell silent. Elias forced a laugh under his breath. "Just the wind," he muttered, though his voice held no conviction. He snapped the reins gently to urge the horse forward. The hooves resumed their steady pace. But the silence continued, pressing against his ears like thick cloth. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Then, without warning, a shriek tore through the air. It came from above, from the branches, from the sky itself. The horse reared violently, thrashing in its harness. The lantern swung wildly, casting frantic shadows. Elias barely had time to see the shape hurtling downward. Wings spread wide. Claws extended like blades, a body twisting through the darkness with impossible speed. The creature landed in front of the horse, slamming into the ground with enough force to shake the carriage. The horse screamed a sound Elias had never heard from an animal and bolted sideways. The carriage twisted, wheels scraping across rocks. In the chaos, Elias was thrown from his seat. He hit the ground hard, dirt exploding around him. The wagon tipped, wood splintering as it crashed against a tree. For a moment, everything was a blur of pain and confusion. Elias struggled to breathe, the taste of earth in his mouth. The horse, tangled in broken harness straps, thrashed and kicked. And there just a few steps away stood the creature. Even through his panic, Elias saw it with clarity he never forgot. Its body was long and gaunt, the ribs visible beneath leathery skin. Its wings, ragged like torn cloth, flapped once, stirring dust and fallen leaves. Two horns curled forward from its skull, sharp as polished bone. Its legs ended not in hooves, not in claws, but something in between iron-like talons that dug into the soil as it stalked forward. But it was the eyes that froze Elias to the ground. They glowed a red so deep it seemed to burn from within, like coals buried beneath ash. When the creature looked at him, he felt time collapse into a single moment. He saw the pain of its birth, the rage of its existence, the loneliness of a child turned into a nightmare. It opened its mouth not to roar, but to release a sound that was neither scream nor growl, but something far worse, a laugh, choked and broken, like the laughter of someone who had forgotten what joy felt like. Elias ran. He did not look back to see what happened to the horse or the carriage. His legs carried him through the trees, branches slicing his face, roots tripping his feet. He did not stop, even when his lungs burned like fire. Behind him, he heard wings beating the air and the faint echo of laughter drifting through the branches. Only when he saw the first flicker of torchlight from the village did he dare to slow, collapsing at the feet of startled guards. The villagers listened as Elias described the creature, the horns curling forward, the iron-like claws, the glowing eyes. His hands shook as he spoke. At first, they doubted his words. But when a hunting party went to retrieve the carriage the next morning, they found the wagon shattered, the horse gone, and deep claw marks gouged into the earth where the creature had stood. No animal could have left marks like those. Fear spread quickly. No one would use the forest trail at night again. They renamed the path almost immediately, as if giving it a new identity could protect them. The old name, the Forest Road, faded from memory. People spoke of it with dread. Devil's Road, a name born from terror, whispered by travelers who walked faster in daylight and never dared to cross after sunset. The legend continued to grow. Some claimed the devil now watched the road as its own territory, circling overhead whenever it sensed travelers. Others swore that on moonless nights, the sound of hooves could be heard behind them, even when no horse was present. Children dared each other to walk a few steps into the trail, only to run back screaming when the wind shifted through the trees. In time, Devil's Road became a scar through the forest, a reminder that even paths made by human hands could belong to something older, something cursed. And deep within the Pine Barrens, the creature still roamed, its claws scraping through the soil, its wings stirring the wind. Those who walked Devil's Road learned to keep their heads down, their voices low, and their prayers silent, because somewhere above, in the shifting shadows of the trees, the Jersey Devil might be waiting, its red eyes watching from the dark, guarding the road named in its honor. As the centuries passed, the world changed around the Pine Barrens. Roads cut through the dense wilderness, airplanes flew overhead, and cities grew brighter with electric light. Yet the heart of the forest remained almost untouched, a place where darkness pooled like ink between the trees, and the wind still carried secrets older than the nation itself. People no longer hunted the Jersey Devil with rifles and dogs. They hunted it with technology. It began with curious locals, teenagers, amateur explorers, and conspiracy enthusiasts who set up cheap motion-activated cameras along hidden trails. Most nights, these devices captured nothing more than raccoons, deer, or the slow sway of branches, but sometimes, the images showed something else. A shadow gliding low above the trees, wings stretched wider than any known bird, a long tail trailing behind it like a serpentine whip. The photos were always blurry, always grainy, yet always just clear enough to stir old fears. A group of local researchers, calling themselves the Barrens Watchers, became obsessed. Armed with night vision equipment and drones, they recorded hours of bizarre footage. Distorted shapes moving in the fog, strange hoofprints that appeared on sand, only to vanish a few feet later, and glowing red lights that flickered between the trees like watchful eyes. They posted their findings online, where thousands argued fiercely, some claiming the images were proof, others insisting they were hoaxes. Scientists from nearby universities investigated as well, though their approach was colder, more logical. They proposed simple explanations: large birds of prey, camera malfunctions, migratory patterns, misinterpreted as monsters. One zoologist wrote a widely shared article, arguing the legend was nothing more than a cultural echo of colonial superstition. His tone was confident, almost mocking. But the people who lived in the Pine Barrens shook their heads at his conclusions. They did not speak loudly about what they believed. They did not need to. They had heard the creature themselves, in the early hours before dawn, when the world was silent enough to reveal what hides beneath everyday noise. They knew the sound, the thin, broken wail that began like a wounded animal and ended like a crying infant. No bird screamed like that. No fox carried the tone of human sorrow. It was the voice of something that had been born in pain and thrown into the dark. Rumors spread across towns, small stories at first, whispered over coffee tables and gas station counters. A farmer claimed he found deep claw marks on the wooden beams of his barn, higher than any animal could reach. A hunter returning from the woods swore he saw something with enormous wings perched atop a distant tree, watching him silently. A young couple driving through a back road late at night reported a bizarre figure crossing the road on two legs before leaping into the air and disappearing into the treetops. These reports were dismissed by outsiders, labeled as misidentifications or drunken imagination. Yet the locals noticed a pattern. The creature seemed drawn to the edges of civilization, to quiet homes near the tree line, to abandoned roadways where no lights glowed. Some believed the Jersey Devil had grown curious about the modern world, peering at windows from the safety of the shadows. Others believed it wasn't curiosity, at all but longing. It never had a home. It never had a family. Not truly. From the moment it opened its eyes, it was rejected, cursed into existence by the one person meant to love it. The cry that people still heard on quiet nights sounded less like rage and more like grief, an eternal echo of its birth. The moment it was torn from humanity and thrust into darkness, a new theory emerged among paranormal researchers, that the Jersey Devil was on hunting people. It was searching for belonging. That it still remembered the warmth of its mother's arms for the brief moments before she screamed. That deep in the Pine Barrens, beneath its monstrous form, there was a lost child whose life had been shaped by a curse spoken in anger. This idea frightened people more than any violent legend ever could. A monster with mindless fury could be avoided, perhaps even fought. But a creature with sadness, creature capable of remembering pain, suggested something else entirely. It meant that the Jersey Devil was not a mythic beast, not a demon from hell, but a tragic being trapped between two worlds, too human to be an animal, too monstrous to be human. In recent years, hikers reported finding small signs patterns scratched into tree bark, piles of stones arranged in circular shapes, feathers pressed into the ground like offerings. Some said these were simply coincidences, others insisted they were symbols the creature's attempts to communicate, or perhaps to mark safe paths through the forest. The mystery continues. Each new generation brings fresh eyes and new tools, thermal scanners, drones, even AI-enhanced cameras. Yet the proof always dances just beyond reach, as though the Pine Barrens itself protects its ancient secret. People stare at the blurry images on their screens, arguing endlessly about pixels and shadows. But the locals don't need images. They still hear that cry somewhere deep in the pines, where moonlight barely touches the earth. It rises like a question that has never been answered, a voice that has never been soothed. They say that as long as the forest stands, the Jersey Devil will wander beneath its branches, searching for something it lost the night it was born, for a home it never had. And every time someone hears that distant, infant-like scream, the legend grows not as a story of terror, but as a mystery of sorrow that refuses to fade. To this day, the legend of the Jersey Devil remains alive, woven into the very roots of the Pine Barrens. Whispered in schools, retold around campfires, and carried across generations like a warning disguised as a story. The world has modernized, yet some myths refuse to disappear, as if the forest itself preserves them. New Jersey's cities glow with neon light, highways roar with engines, and people live surrounded by screens and machines. But just a short drive away, the Pine Barrens remain untamed, dark, and ancient, as though time has forgotten it. Urban hunters and thrill-seekers venture into the woods, armed with GPS trackers, night vision cameras, audio recorders, and thermal scanners. They call themselves cryptid investigators, convinced that technology will finally capture proof where bullets and torches once failed. They camp beneath twisted pines, waiting for the unknown. At night, they scan the sky for winged shadows, and every strange rustle sends adrenaline rushing through their veins. Some return with shaky footage, green shapes moving through fog, or a shadow leaping between trees. Others return with nothing at all, their courage swallowed by silence. But all of them return with stories. Meanwhile, the old villagers treat the legend differently. They do not hunt. They do not record. They do not seek proof. They carry the tale like a burden, a tradition, and a truth too heavy for outsiders to understand. To them, the Jersey Devil is not entertainment or adventure, it is a wound in their history. They tell their grandchildren not to wander into the forest after dark. They close their windows on stormy nights. They avoid speaking the number 13 inside their homes. They remember the old woman in the cabin, her curse shouted into the howling storm. And they believe that every cry in the night is her mistake echoing through the centuries. On certain nights, especially when storms roll over the Pine Barrens, and lightning splits the sky, people say, a long piercing scream rises from the trees. It begins like wind, pushing through the branches, then sharpens into something unnatural. Something human, yet twisted beyond recognition. It is the sound of rage and grief tangled together. Locals swear the cry carries emotion, fear, loneliness, and a bitterness so deep it chills the blood. Those who've heard it describe a feeling like being watched by something invisible, something ancient. Sometimes travelers passing through the forest at night speak of strange sightings. A woman driving home alone sees a figure perched on a broken tree, its wings folded tight, its glowing eyes staring back at her through the rain. A group of students camping near a forgotten trail hear heavy footsteps circling their tent. Then the scraping of claws on bark before silence returns. A lost hiker claims he saw something leap across a ravine with impossible speed, its shadow stretching like a nightmare against the storm clouds. Yet no body has ever been found. No hunter has ever captured it. No camera has ever fully revealed it. The Jersey Devil exists at the edges of vision, too fast, too silent, too clever, or perhaps just too supernatural to be caught. Every attempt to trap it ends in confusion. Bent metal cages, shredded nets, or nothing but the sound of wings disappearing into the blackness. Some believe the creature can slip between worlds, vanishing into the mist, as if the forest itself opens to swallow it. Others think it is simply smarter than those who chase it, having survived centuries of fear and pursuit. The most chilling belief, however, is not that the Jersey Devil cannot die, but that it refuses to die. That it is held together by the curse that gave it life. The words spoken by Mother Leeds on that terrible night were not just superstition, they were a binding. Let this child be a devil. A mother's hatred became destiny. And destiny, once born, does not fade easily. If a creature begins as pain, grows in isolation, and survives in darkness, what does it become? Not a beast, perhaps, but a living memory, an embodiment of the bitterness that created it. The Jersey Devil is not simply a monster stalking the pines. It is a reminder of how a single moment of cruelty can echo through generations. Today, children learn about the Jersey Devil in schoolbooks, surrounded by illustrations that make it look like a curious myth. Tourists buy souvenirs shaped like claws and wings. Bars name drinks after it. The legend has become part of culture and commerce, but beneath the humor, beneath the merchandise and memes, the real story still lingers, kept alive by those who remember that legends are born from something real. The Pine Barrens remain quiet most nights. The wind hums, trees sway, owls call from distant branches. But when a storm gathers, thunder rolls like drums around the forest, and rain falls heavy over the black pines. It is at that moment when lightning reveals the old bones of the woods that people pause and listen. And sometimes, across the roar of the storm, they hear the scream, sharp, impossibly loud, echoing between the trees, as if something deep inside the forest is cursing its own birth once more. No one knows if the Jersey Devil still feels the memory of its first moments, the warmth of the cabin, the terrified eyes of Mother Leeds, the sudden cold of the night. No one knows if the creature wishes it had never been born, or if it embraces its fate as a living legend. What is known is this: the cry continues. It has never stopped, not in winter, not in summer, not in the 2 centuries since the curse fell like lightning from a mother's mouth. A legend that survives war, industry, technology, and doubt is more than a story. It is a shadow carved into reality. And as long as the Pine Barrens stand vast, dark, and endless, the Jersey Devil's scream will rise with the storm, reminding the world that some curses never die. Somewhere beneath the twisted branches, a pair of glowing eyes still watch the world pass by. The wind carries the echo of wings, and on certain nights, the forest remembers the 13th child, born in anger, forever condemned to be a devil.